You're watching Dukascopy TV. Today I spoke to Nicholas Consonery, a senior analyst with Eurasia, who joins me now to discuss today's data. Nicholas, China's exports grew 7.2% in August, above market expectations of a 6.0% rise from a year earlier. What are the main reasons for this, in your opinion?
Well, I think we're starting to see some indications that the more positive global growth story that is going on right now, in particular in the United States, is really starting to benefit the Chinese economy more. This is a big issue that I think has been one that has been sort of lost in the narrative about how much the Chinese economy is slowing down. The reality is the economy still exports a lot. A lot of that goes to the developed world, and we're seeing in particular in the U.S. a bit more of a recovery here. So this is, in general, a positive story for China too.
Other data showing consumer inflation held steady in August while producer price deflation continued to ease. How positive are these signs?
Well, I think what it suggests is that the government has some space right now to continue to pursue I wouldn't say accommodative or certainly not stimulative monetary policy, but I think it makes it easier for the government not to have to tighten monetary policy further in a way that would really risk any kind of a sharper slowdown in growth. So in general, I think the fact that inflation has remained relatively muted this year is overall it's a good story for China. It's taken pressure off of monetary authorities, and at the same time, I think it's allowed China to have a little bit of space on currency policy. So overall, the government remains concerned about inflation over the medium term. I think that's certainly true, but for right now, that level of concern is just not very acute.
And with these figures in mind, what's your general forecast for the next year for China and also for the global economy?
I think we at Eurasia Group, since we focus more on sort of political risk, we approach this from a more political perspective. And I think the reality is that the government in China has become increasingly tolerant of a slowdown in growth in order to facilitate an economic restructuring at home. And this basic program has been stated explicitly by the senior leadership, by President Xi Jinping, by Premier Li Keqiang, even over the past week. So I think that is going to be over the next couple of years. I don't think the government's basic policy preference is going to change. They don't want to see the floor fall out from growth, and they have the tools to maintain growth at a level that they're comfortable with, which right now seems to be shaping up at around the 7% level per year. It's certainly the case that they're moving into a period where I think because of domestic economic drivers, it could be a little bit harder for them to hit those numbers. But the reality is going back to the earlier point, is that the global economy is looking a little bit better now, and that'll make it a little bit easier at the margins for China to benefit from that story as well. In terms of the global economy, I think we're moving into a phase of a little bit of increased optimism as well. I mean, we've seen, certainly where I sit in the U.S., a slow but gradually growing pace economic recovery, and I think in Europe, some of the worst downside expectations have been disproven as well. So, overall, this isn't the ideal situation for China, but it is one that I think relative to where we were a few years ago certainly improved.
Nick, you just said that these figures weren't ideal. What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, it was just much easier for China in the pre-financial crisis period to just assume that exports would continue to grow quite rapidly. I mean, that was a story that was positive for China in the sense of accruing, some serious and very rapid domestic economic benefits for the country. And it was one that was sort of a relatively easy ride. And so that's the reality of, I think, what's going on the policy side in China right now is that basic, that basic low-hanging fruit of export-oriented growth has been picked, and the government needs to find its new growth driver now.
Nicholas, thank you very much for joining me today. And that's all we have time for now, but do check back later for more updates and interviews from the TV team. Bye for now.